Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about being an ambulatory wheelchair user because I get a lot of confusion, especially over on Instagram, about the fact that I use a wheelchair, can I walk? I've had the, in my opinion, hilarious comment of she's not even paralysed, like accusing me of lying. I'm not paralysed. I don't say I'm paralysed, and there's plenty of photos of me standing and videos of me moving that you should be able to infer that no, I'm not paralysed. And though people who do have paralysis do use wheelchairs, not everyone who uses a wheelchair is paralysed. I'm not paralysed, and neither are a lot of people who are ambulatory wheelchair users. So let's start with the real basic stuff. What is an ambulatory wheelchair user? So obviously a wheelchair user is anyone who uses a wheelchair, but ambulatory means there is also walking that can happen. And so an ambulatory wheelchair user can walk, and they're not a constant or permanent wheelchair user. The ability to walk, the difficulty of walking may be in a huge range. Sometimes it may be that people can walk around the house, but to go out they need a wheelchair. But it could also mean that someone's walking is quite functional and they only need a wheelchair when they're in a flare-up, for example. So there's a big range, and literally anyone who has a wheelchair that they use but doesn't always use it is an ambulatory wheelchair, even if they use it almost all the time or if they use it almost never. If you use it sometimes and not others, ambulatory wheelchair user. The concept of an ambulatory wheelchair user is new for a lot of people. Media often portrays only wheelchair users who are permanently wheelchair users, especially because of injury and paralysis. But that's not all people who use a wheelchair, and though obviously those people do exist and deserve that representation, I think sometimes people see someone in a wheelchair and assume it's the same as that, and which I think is why you get those got your comments, oh, I saw her leg move, I don't think she's even paralysed. People who use wheelchairs can sometimes move their legs. Sometimes they can. Permanent wheelchair users don't have to be paralysed, so they could sometimes move their legs as well. But also ambulatory wheelchair users can almost certainly move their legs because they don't need the wheelchair 100% of the time. You've not identified a liar if you see someone who uses a wheelchair and their leg moves. This is likely to be an ambulatory wheelchair user. Now, one of the things I think we should liken it to is glasses. Some people have glasses that they need to wear all the time. They cannot see without them. They cannot function without them. Some people pop their reading glasses on and off and only need them for certain things. If the text is big enough, maybe they can go without their glasses, but small text in a novel, they need to get their reading glass. This is exactly the same as ambulatory wheelchair users. We decide whether to use the wheelchair based on how we feel and what the activity is going to be. So if it's going to be a long walk, I'll take the wheelchair. If the bus drops you right off where you're going, I probably won't, because it's a little bit faff to get on the bus. I really weigh up each individual scenario with what's going to happen, how much walking, how much standing, the ease of access for the wheelchair. There's pros and cons to walking, there's pros and cons to using the wheelchair. I really consider what will be the best for the certain situation. And also sometimes we bring the wheelchair along and I walk, which I know is a crazy idea if you're still in the mindset that wheelchair users can't walk and are always paralysed. And I do sometimes think that people assume we've lost our person in the wheelchair somewhere because the wheelchair is empty and I'm walking alongside it. Sometimes I'll hold on to it, more like a walking frame. Sometimes I'll just walk with my stick and a friend will push the wheelchair, which I really enjoy because I can do just a little bit of walking, but I have the flexibility to have a rest, sit down, and also to bow out at any moment if I start feeling unwell or if we come across an unexpected steep slope. I don't have to force myself to do it. I don't have to struggle through it because the wheelchair's there for me. And so it's a tool in the way that you might carry your reading glasses in your bag in case you need to read something at some point. Sometimes we bring the wheelchair with us, that I don't feel like I need it right now, and I don't think we're going to walk very much, but I'm not certain. And that was the perfect reason to bring the wheelchair. So I think it's one of those things that we understand the concept perfectly. We understand it for glasses. We also understand it for cars. You may consider before you go out, if it's a short distance, you might walk, and if it's a long distance, you might take the car there. We all understand that, and that's exactly the same for the wheelchair, except my amount of walking I can do is significantly less than what I would call the average person. But we all understand that concept of using the right mode of transport or the right aid for the right situation. And that's exactly the same as the wheelchair for the ambulatory wheelchair user. Okay, so now let's cover why I personally have the wheelchair. I haven't always had it. I got ill at 16 and I didn't get a wheelchair until I was 22 or 23. So for a long time before I got the wheelchair, I was, let's say, managing. I wasn't doing great. There were a lot of places in the city that I live that I couldn't go to. If the bus didn't kind of drop me off outside, couldn't go. Even with friends to help me and support me, there was just not a way of me being able to walk far enough to do everything that maybe I wanted to. That's where the wheelchair comes in for me. One of the main things is when I'm going with my friends, we can go anywhere. We don't have to have a strict plan. We can wander. I mean, I'm not technically wandering, but we can wander around. We can go to shops, we can go to a pub and then change our minds and go to a different one. And because I'm not walking, we don't have such a tight, limited space and area that we can go to. A second thing about the wheelchair, which is amazing, is I used to put a huge amount of effort into walking to a place, and then I'd get there and I'd feel unwell. So I've arrived at whatever activity it is or, destination, and I didn't feel well. I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be at home. I felt sick. I needed to eat. I needed water. I felt like I'd exercised, a bit sweaty, just all of that kind of stuff that's not very conducive for having a nice time with your friends, because I walked there. And it really limited my enjoyment of just life, because even when something was close enough that I could walk to, it wasn't really close enough that I could walk to. So I would get there and feel too unwell to really enjoy myself. That is a spectacular thing about the wheelchair. I get there and I've not used that much energy. Oh, my feet are numb. And when I get there, I've not used all my energy because a friend was pushing the wheelchair and I was able to enjoy the actual activity that we'd gone for. That is, for me, a game changer, and that is one of the best things about having the wheelchair. In our society, we've got it into our heads that a wheelchair is a thing to be avoided at all costs, and the wheelchair will take away your freedom. But as someone who lived with a fairly moderate to severe borderline, I would say, chronic illness that really stopped me going out and stopped me doing things with my friends and my family, the wheelchair is freedom in a way that I can't truly express, and I wish more people saw it that way. And I also wish I'd seen it that way sooner. I, for years, didn't identify as disabled. I felt that I was ill, which is, a semantic difference if you ask me now. But I didn't feel disabled. I felt incredibly limited by an illness. And I also didn't feel that I was disabled enough to have mobility aids to get the help that I clearly needed. And also I didn't want to fail. I didn't want to give in. I didn't want to lose to the chronic illness, to the disability, which thinking now seems like a funny, illogical thought process, but at the time it consumed me. And I don't think I really knew about the concept of ambulatory wheelchairs at the time. I think, like a lot of people, my only exposure to wheelchair usage was paralysis very specifically, but also generally people who couldn't walk. And I could walk, and therefore I wasn't entitled to a wheelchair. And I say that I want to put air quotes around the word entitled, because it's just an object. Anyone can buy one. You don't have to be entitled. If you want to get a wheelchair, sure, it's just a thing. If someone buys those, cheap reading glasses from Boots without getting a prescription, that's fine. If you want it, get it. Who cares? But I felt very much that I wasn't entitled to a wheelchair, even though it would make my life so much easier, that it would make my life happier and less painful, more interesting, and it's really important to me now. A couple more things that I love about the wheelchair are not having to worry about getting home after an activity that I use a lot of energy, and carrying things. I just sit in my wheelchair, I put all my stuff on my lap, someone pushes it, and it's perfect. I don't have to lug things around, I don't have to carry stuff because I can't really do it. And it just makes my life so much better and so much easier. And that's the true reason for being an ambulatory wheelchair user, if it's the type of thing that would help you out, is the reducing of difficulty in your life. But if I use a wheelchair and the wheelchair is so amazing and brings me so much joy and freedom, etc., why do I ever choose to walk? Well, partly, sometimes it's it's nice to walk. I can't walk very far, but sometimes you do want to just have a little bit of a walk, just, you know, along the road, or maybe you want to hop out of the wheelchair at the park and have a little bit of a walk in the grass. You know, sometimes it's nice to walk. The more realistic reason that I don't take the wheelchair everywhere is accessibility. The world is more accessible to me with my wheelchair than without it, but the world is not the best at wheelchair accessibility. It has definite drawbacks, especially living in such an old city. A lot of the buildings are protected because of their age, so there are limited changes some places can do to their buildings, which means some places aren't accessible and can't be made accessible, and that would be a reason why I'd not take my wheelchair somewhere. Some of them could and they just don't bother, which is annoying. Most places do at least attempt to make things accessible. Most places are very receptive to having a wheelchair left behind the front desk, or, you know, in a staff area so it's safe while I get out of the wheelchair, but not everywhere has the space. So it's one of those things you have to consider the place you're going, look it up online, find out if it's accessible, and really take into account whether it's going to be more or less difficult to take the wheelchair. The wheelchair makes my life a lot easier, but sometimes it's not worth the hassle. So it's like a balancing act of choosing the right method of travel, depending on where we're going and the accessibility measures. Another point is sometimes your outfit looks busted up. Unfortunately, it's true. Sometimes your outfit is just cuter when you stood. Sometimes I just want to like have pictures for Instagram stood up because I want my outfit to be fully photographed. And is that a shallow reason to, you know, not to get out of the wheelchair? Yeah. Is it a valid reason? Sure. I can do whatever I want. There are no rules here. And the wheelchair is supposed to make my life easier and better. It's not supposed to create a whole rule set, and I don't really let it. I just do what I want, and if it helps me, it'll come, and if it's gonna get in the way, it won't come with me. Easy as that. It's kind of like deciding whether to bring an umbrella. You're like, chances are I'm gonna need the umbrella, but also I have a small bag and I'm gonna have to hold the umbrella in my hand all day, and it's like, ugh, what a faff. I'm going to like remember the umbrella everywhere I go. Maybe I'll just like accept the fact that I'm probably gonna get caught in the rain and get a bit wet and it will be fine. Sometimes you know, it's one of those things of, I know that something's gonna make me feel unwell. I know that I'm gonna end up walking too much. I'm gonna feel in a lot of pain and very sick, especially the next day, but also while it's happening. Usually I decide to bring it, but sometimes I just decide to live with the consequences of too much standing and walking, in the way that you might decide to not bring your massive umbrella, even though you know it's gonna rain, because sometimes you just don't want to lug around a massive umbrella, you know. Now, I told you that I've gotten comments of people clearly not understanding that ambulatory wheelchair users just even exist. They think they've caught me out by realizing that I'm not paralyzed, or the fact that I can walk means I shouldn't be using a wheelchair, and blah blah blah. I'm giving in to the illness, and, you know, various nonsense. If you are an ambulatory wheelchair user or are thinking maybe it will be the right thing for you, I want to tell you that I've only had these things said to me online. I think if you don't put yourself out there in the way that I do, I don't think you're ever going to get these type of comments. I mean, there is a chance that you're going to run into someone really awful and you're going to be unlucky, but in real life, people don't say things like that. People keep their opinions to themselves, or the actual number of ableist idiots is quite low, but they just really find their way into the disabled community online. But people in real life are accommodating and kind. The fact of being an ambulatory wheelchair user gives you so much freedom, more freedom than if you were to just exist in your body that I'm assuming is not as functional as you kind of need it to be, if you're thinking of being an ambulatory wheelchair user. But also, unfortunately, permanent wheelchair users don't have the luxury of popping out to go up a couple of steps or whatever, and I know that the popping out is very significant privilege that I have in terms of myself. I think, oh, a step or two is not that big a deal, but that can be the difference for some people of accessibility and not. So they are kind of a big deal, and they should be like making more of an effort to put ramps in. But for the purposes of this video, as an ambulatory wheelchair user, I do have that privilege that I don't always need things to be perfectly accessible. So I just wanted to make that clear, that I can't fully empathize with permanent wheelchair users and the difficulty, because I do have the ability to get out and walk just a little bit. If you're thinking about becoming an ambulatory wheelchair user, getting your first wheelchair, I've got some videos on borrowing a wheelchair for a day. I rented a wheelchair for a week, you know, various things of trying them out, getting used to it, you know, getting the train for the first time. That might help you. For me, it gives me incredible freedom and incredible happiness. It's become so normal in my friendship group. Nobody bats an eyelid at it anymore. Like, I mean, they never did anything weird, but now it's such an ingrained part of our friendship group. I just, you know, say, oh, I'm gonna bring the wheelchair. Is like anyone like able to push, and you know, someone will, you know, volunteer for the role, and that's that. People get used to things pretty easily, and even if people are surprised that you maybe want a wheelchair or thinking about getting a wheelchair in the beginning, they'll get used to it, and people, you know, just get used to the facts of life basically. And the fact is that every time I go out, I consider whether or not to bring the wheelchair, and my friends and family, you know, are involved in that discussion, and they know the things I'm thinking about, and the fact that buses are a bit of a faff, and whether they're accessible. And sometimes they'll like message me and say I've checked the website of the place we're going to, it says it's accessible, blah blah blah, you know, and they do that kind of stuff on their own volition. And I just want to I want to tell you it's gonna be okay if you choose to use a wheelchair, that real people in the real world are kind, and even if you surprise friends and families by getting a wheelchair, they'll get over it, and they'll just get used to it, and it'll become a normal thing to them, in a way that, you know, everything becomes normal after a while. And the freedom is key. The freedom is unmatched. For me personally, if the wheelchair was taken away today, a lot of the activities in the coming weeks that I have planned with friends, I just physically wouldn't be able to do. There'd just be no way of doing it. And I can't, it's one of those things of, it took me a long time to get the wheelchair, to be brave enough to try it, and now I can't imagine living without it. Same as the walking stick. How did I go for so long just without the aids that I needed? So if you're thinking about getting a wheelchair, I really encourage you to, or definitely, you know, rent one, try one out, because that really helped me come to terms with it, get used to the idea, things like that. I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to watch all the videos that I mentioned about my wheelchair journey. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye!